Well, happy holidays. It is holiday time, and you know what that means for the NBA. It means we're a little over a quarter into the season, and with that being the case, I wanted to give my impressions, my thoughts of what has happened so far in the league through a tier system. Now, I apologize straight up for my lack of consistency once again. To be fully transparent, at times I struggle with what actually to put out there, right, in terms of what to create, in terms of content, right, like what makes the most amount of sense. In addition to what makes the most amount of sense, like what subjects should I cover, what team should I cover, right? And I am hopeful that using this tier system week in and week out, assessing how teams have risen, what teams have impressed me, what teams have, I'm soured on, to a degree, will kind of help me develop a modicum of consistency and help me create a little bit more of a posting schedule and stay consistent and post a little bit more regularly than I have been in the past. So hopefully going forward, we get a little bit more consistent content. Like I said, I know I've promised that before, but I really am going to be a lot more intentional in trying to post more videos consistently. Once again, I do apologize for that lack of consistency. All that out of the way, all that done, let's get to the tier system. So to kick things off, I wanted to start off with some tiers that I had made before, but I actually didn't post this video. However, these tiers are indicative of where I thought the NBA was on the date of November 15th. So these are tiers as of November 15th. Starting at the tippy top, you have the reigning champion, of course, the Boston Celtics, in a tier by themselves. A tier under that, in the Can We Scare Boston tier, you had the still at that point in time undefeated Cleveland Cavaliers, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, and the Phoenix Suns. A tier below that were the Golden State Warriors in the Contending to Contend tier, along with the Dallas Mavericks, who were 5-7 at that point and had lost 4 consecutive games. The potentially Contending to Contend tier with Memphis, the Lakers, who were playing decent basketball at that point in time, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Rockets, the Pacers, the Heat, and the Magic. And then you had in the trying to find themselves tier, this was the biggest group of teams in that tier: the Knicks, the Pelicans, the Hawks, the Bulls, the Clippers, the Nets, the Sixers, the Kings, the Spurs, the Hornets, and then the Bucks. The Bucks were not doing well at that point in time, at the beginning of the season, right? And then you had the rebuilding teams, right? The Detroit Pistons, the Portland Trail Blazers, the Utah Jazz, the Washington Wizards, and the Toronto Raptors. So those are my tiers as of the 15th of November. Where do we stand today? Well, as of today, here are the tier system. We're going to start from the bottom. So we'll work our way from the bottom to the top. So we're going to start in the rebuilding / directionless / disaster class tier. So I kind of obviously changed the name of that tier to kind of suit the teams that were in that group a little bit more, right? And of course, you got the Toronto Raptors. I have them at the front because I've seen the most amount of talent and, consistency in terms of how they play, how hard they play. They played some very tough teams. Very tough, right? They've played some close games against very good teams like Cleveland, like Boston. They're not an easy out, right? However, they are definitely talent deficient, in my opinion. They're definitely not on the level of teams that can actually try and contend to get in the playoffs. But you have the Toronto Raptors, you have the New Orleans Pelicans, a major disappointment this year, along with the Philadelphia 76ers. Although I'll give the Sixers credit, they've been playing well as of late, right? Then you have Portland, along with the Utah Jazz, and of course the Washington Wizards, who are also a disaster class, just straight up as factual as I can possibly be. Then the next tier below, right, you'll notice a little bit of a change here in this tier, right? In the trying to find themselves tier, the Lakers have fallen to this tier, right? The Lakers defensively, I'm just extremely disappointed with what I've seen from their team completely. Anthony Davis, LeBron James, they've played about as well as they can. I mean, of course, they've had some not so great games in that stretch, but for the most part, I think they've played at the level that is required of them to win. The defense of the Lakers, though, is something that is definitely concerning, right? You have the Atlanta Hawks, who I think are working their way up to maybe even the potentially contend tier. They have wins against Cleveland, or 2 wins against Cleveland, a win against Boston, right? And they're a game, I think actually 2 games now. They actually just beat the New York Knicks as the recording of this video. They're now 2 games above 500. Very impressive showing from the Hawks over the past couple of weeks. They may, by next week, jump to that potentially contending to contend tier, right? You're the Minnesota Timberwolves, a disappointment, right? We're going to have to talk about at some point whether or not, I'm going to give them a little bit more time. I may address them next week. The trade for Julius Randle. Like, was that actually not a good trade for them? Obviously, the Knicks at that point in time, I think the trade has looked good for them. Obviously, they're not in this tier, so they're probably in a tier higher, and you'll see that going forward. But clearly, Karl-Anthony Towns has found a place in New York and has played pretty well to this point. But the Julius Randle experiment to this point has been disappointing. It hasn't yielded the results that they've wanted, right? The Pacers, the Brooklyn Nets, the Detroit Pistons, right? You saw that climb, right? They were in the rebuilding tier, but to me, this is a team that JB Bickerstaff really has coming into its own. Defensively, they're defending at a much better level. Last season, they were bottom 5th in terms of defensive rating, and this season, they're actually middle of the pack. That's an improvement. It's not top 10, but it certainly is an improvement based off where they were last year, and if they get 4 more wins, they'll tie their win total from where they were a season ago. So give some credit to the Detroit Pistons and how JB Bickerstaff has that team playing. Moving on to the potentially contending to contend tier, right? You've got the Golden State Warriors. Look, little bit of a slide as of late. You know what I mean? They've lost 6 of their last 8 games. A little bit of a slide there. I definitely feel like that it warranted the dip into the last tier. The Milwaukee Bucks, I had them at the bottom of the, trying to find themselves / soft rebuild tier. All of a sudden, how they've played lately, they've now jumped to the potentially contending contend tier, right? The Phoenix Suns, who have dropped a little bit, the Los Angeles Clippers, and finally the Miami Heat. Now getting up to the teams that I think to this point look like legitimate playoff teams and teams that could potentially make the conference finals win the contending to contend tier, right? You've got the Orlando Magic. I mean, look at what they're doing without Paolo Banchero. They found a way to maintain their standing in the East, right? They are currently sitting at 3rd in the Eastern Conference behind Boston and Cleveland, right? And they're doing all of this without Paolo Banchero and the recently injured Franz Wagner. So this is a team that is currently doing a very solid job at 17-10 at holding that 3rd seed in the East. The Denver Nuggets, who to me always find a way to look somewhat impressive. I know right now they're at 7th in the West, but when you have Nikola Jokic, when you have the best player in the NBA on your team, I cannot drop you any lower than where I have them at the moment, right? The New York Knicks, who are 4th in the Eastern Conference, right? Like I said, Karl-Anthony Towns playing some beautiful basketball right now. Him, Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, that team is looking very good. The Houston Rockets, who were 2nd in the West about a week and a half ago. And finally, the Memphis Grizzlies. Memphis Grizzlies, I actually want to spend some time on here. This Memphis team has momentum right now. They are currently winners of 10 of their last 13 games, right? They're currently 2nd in the West. And what's impressive about what this Memphis team is doing is I think they're primarily doing it in a multitude of ways, right? When you get to a certain point in these tiers, starting with this Memphis Grizzlies team, and even, if we're being completely honest, the Knicks as well, when we get to these point in the tiers, with the exception of the Denver Nuggets, right, you're going to start to look at depth, right? This Memphis Grizzlies team has depth. In this span, in the last 13 games that they've played, they are 1st in bench points at about 50.8 bench points per game, right? They're 3rd in opponent field goal percentage. They're playing very, very good defense. They're 7th in defensive rating in the league, and they're 4th in net rating, right? You've got guys like Ja Morant playing very, very good basketball. He's averaging 23.2 points per game, while 46.9% shooting from the field in this stretch. Jaren Jackson Jr. averaging 21.5 points per game, 49.5% from the field, right? 6.6 boards along with 2.5 blocks a game, playing well in this stretch. And another guy, I know most probably were trying to expect to see Desmond Bane, but no, it's Santi Aldama, He's playing quite well, 13.5 points per game off 58.7% shooting from the field, 52.3% shooting from 3, right? One of the leaders off that Memphis bench who's played quite well, right? So when I look at this Memphis Grizzlies team, to me, they're on that fringe of going from, contending to contend to can we scare Boston, because they did scare Boston in a game earlier on Sunday that they were able to win, right? So I look at this Memphis team and I've been very impressed with how they've looked over the course of these past few weeks. So I had them at the front of that contending to contend tier. Let's do the next tier. The next tier is called the Can We Scare Boston tier. I still kept that consistent with the tier system that I made about a month ago at this point in time, right? And these three teams to me have set themselves apart from the others, right? Like I said, when you start with Memphis, they're at the fringe, at the top of that contending to contend tier. When I start with Memphis, these are teams that have depth, right? Like I said, this Dallas Mavericks team certainly has depth, right? When I take a look at the fact that how they started the year, remember, I had them pretty low. They'd lost 4 of their last 5 when at that point in time in November 15th. And one of the things that to me stood out were how they played in the clutch, right? This Dallas team in the clutch a season ago was 23-9 in clutch games, right? They were the second highest in clutch win percentage in the NBA a season ago. And to start this season, right? I mean, they were 1-6 in the 7 of the 12 clutch games that they had started the season with. So definitely a far cry from where they were a season ago. But if you look at how they've played in the last couple of weeks since November 15th, they've been 4-1 in the clutch, which is an 80% clutch win percentage, which is 4th in the NBA in that span. So they're playing a lot better. In addition to playing a lot better, they're getting contributions from guys like PJ Washington, right? PJ Washington averaging 14.6 points per game off 46% shooting from the field, 45% shooting from 3. A guy like Spencer Dinwiddie giving them 12 off the bench, right? Along with 4 assists with 45% shooting from 3. A guy like Quentin Grimes as well, 12.7 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, shooting 44% from 3. And Najee Marshall, who has been a godsend for them, especially in the games that Luka was not available. He's averaging 16.1 points per game, shooting 56.8% from the field, 42.3% from 3. All these guys are shooting over 40% from 3 in that span, right? And in that span, not only are you getting contributions from these guys, but Dallas is 3rd in offensive rating, 8th in defensive rating, and then 2nd in net rating. A very impressive showing, but I don't want to talk about Dallas without talking about their 2 stars, right? Starting with Kyrie Irving, right? Kyrie Irving has had a phenomenal season, right? I mean, this is a guy that's almost once again shooting 50, 40, 90, right? I mean, this is so impressive for a guy his size. And keep in mind, he already averaged 50, 40, 90 a few seasons ago when he was in Brooklyn. Now, I know this isn't exactly 50, 40, 90. I know he's at 88.5% from the free throw line, but still shooting 50% from the field and 47% from 3 is nothing to be sneezed at, along with Luka Doncic. Now, Luka Doncic, I really wish I was able to get the video out, and I wanted to earlier in the year. I was very low on how he played. I felt like at times he was hurting Dallas more than he was helping them, right? He was not shooting the ball relatively well. The numbers were there. The averages were there, right? Averaging 29.3 points per game, 8 boards, 8 assists. But I mean, look at the percentages, 42% from the field, 32% from 3, right? He wasn't where he needed to be. And at that point in time, up until, November 15th, Dallas was 5-7. Remember, they'd lost 4 straight games. Well, let's take a look at what Luka has done lately. 27.7 points per game off 50.4% shooting from the field, 40% shooting from 3. That free throw percentage is a lot lower than it was to start the year at 66.7% from the line. Once again, he's at 8.8 boards along with 8.2 assists, but has played in 7 of Dallas's last 13 games, and they are 6-1 in the games that he has played, right? So he is having a phenomenal year since coming back from that injury that he sustained earlier in the year. So Dallas is a team I am very high on, and you can't be high on Dallas without being high on the team that they lost to last night, the best team in the West, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the next team in this can we potentially scare Boston tier, right? This Oklahoma City team is as defensive as they come. They are the league's best defensive unit in the NBA. They have the best defensive rating, the best net rating in the NBA. They lead the league in points off turnovers. They're first in assist to turnover percentage as well. This is a team that has their MVP candidate in Gilgeous-Alexander playing outstanding basketball, averaging 30.2 off 51.5% shooting from the field, for goodness sake. 5.4 rebounds, 6.3 assists, 34% from the 3-point line, and 85.9% free throw line. I'll tell you what, Shea was my pick from MVP coming into this year, and if OKC keeps this up, if they stay the number 1 seed, I don't see why they won't. I predicted them to finish not only with the number 1 seed in the West, but to meet the team they beat last night in Dallas in the conference finals. Although I had them losing, I still am very high on them, and I still think there's a possibility they could win against Dallas, right? When you look at the defensive depth of this team, from Alex Caruso to Cason Wallace to, how even Shea plays on the defensive end of the ball, along with Lou Dort. I mean, you look at all the guys they have, and they beat Dallas last night. They didn't even have Chet Holmgren, right? Isaiah Hartenstein off the bench. This is a deep, deep team, and they defended a very high level. So that's why I had them as the second place team in my can we scare Boston tier. And then obviously the Cleveland Cavaliers, who I have talked about at length in a previous video, who are currently at 21-4, and the 19-5 Boston Celtics, who are still at that tier, the top tier of reigning champions. Even though Cleveland has a better record, right, the champions deserve to stay at the top until someone dethrones them. But those are my tiers to this point in the season. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Where did you agree with me? Where did you disagree with me? Do you think a team should be higher? Do you think a team should be lower? Let me know in the comment section below. Leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.